Richett, and you're listening to The Amplify Show, episode number 83. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be back on the show. I took a little break to soak in a full Michigan summer we packed so much fun in. If you're not from Michigan, then this is a little secret for you. You need to visit sometime. Just take a look at a map. You see all that fresh water completely surrounding the state and all those lakes within it? There's nothing like it. It's worth the trip. And I say that having not been everywhere, I'll admit, having not been to many places actually, but maybe that's why. Because why would I ever leave, in the summer at least? Now, winter is a different story, but I'm really going to try hard this year to lean into it, and I have an episode coming up that dives into the power of getting outside year-round, no matter where you live or the struggles you face bundling up little ones. I'm doing this episode because I need it, and maybe some of my mom friends out there need it too. I have a surprise guest lined up, so stay tuned for that. Now, here's a quick update before I dive into today's long-awaited episode. I teased this a couple months ago. So many have been waiting for it. The guest is so good. But first, if you didn't know, I'm launching a doll brand. That's right. After the most popular doll brand for young girls, American Girl, decided to sell girls everywhere the lie that maybe they're living in the wrong body. And they go as far as to suggest that they could get puberty blockers to delay their body's normal, healthy female process because maybe they discover that they're in fact a boy living in a girl's body. That's right. The American Girl brand claims this. It's all outlined in a book they released last year about body image. Now, if you want to see for yourself, check out my Instagram @FaithFriendsCo. I have a highlight that shows the more than 20 pages of pro-transgender indoctrination, and I'll do a whole episode about that soon. But if you'd like to get on the wait list to get one of the very first Faith Friends 18-inch dolls, they're beautiful, heirloom quality dolls that foster creativity, virtue, and faith. They have a custom journal I'm designing by hand with special accessories and classic wholesome styles. Then head on over to faithfriendsco.com. The presale will be launching really soon. And if you're listening to this in August or September, then yes, hop over quickly because the presale is only going to be open for a little bit. And I can't wait to offer this much needed Christian alternative for girls everywhere. Okay, now this actually sets up today's episode quite nicely. Today, we're talking about feminism and the modern derailed feminist movement in particular. A few years ago, I started to question everything that culture says about being a woman, especially media, shows, magazines, popular books, and the self-help authors and gurus of our time, celebrities, pop culture. I kind of had this big awakening to it. I started to realize that maybe I fell for a bunch of lies myself. And now, of course, I see it everywhere. It's really escalated to the point where we have some of the top brands for women and girls proactively pushing harmful agendas like the one I just talked about, which is why I'm launching the doll brand. But before it was even that obvious, like just a few years ago, before people were even debating and asking, what is a woman? It's hard to believe how quickly this is really derailed. I started to wonder, how do we go as a culture, as a society of women from a place where we embraced our unique God-given gifts to bear children, to have empathy, to nurture, to teach our children and love our husbands and lead in our homes, and yes, also lead outside of our homes for some, but that wasn't a focus and certainly not the badge of success it is today. Homemaking was seen as not just honorable, but normal, to this place where women are now encouraged to put their focus on success outside of their families and homes, and even to the detriment of their families and homes. Abortion is not only offered as a choice for women, but is viewed as basic health care. Depression is at an all-time high. Men have infringed upon historically women-only spaces like women's bathrooms and sports and prisons and beauty pageants with the word miss in them. And this is all applauded by our biggest government and corporate entities. Now, even for women who want to stay home, they struggle because we live in an economy that pretty much requires 2 incomes to support a family. And I've wondered, how do we get to this place? And more importantly, what can we do to fix it, to get back home? So to tackle these questions, we're talking to Carrie Gress. I started reading some of her books on these topics a couple years ago, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a scholar at the Institute for Human Ecology at Catholic University of America. She's a married mother of 5 and the co-editor of the popular women's magazine, Theology of Home. She's authored 10 books, many of which tackle this subject of feminism. Her latest book out now is called The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. And to back up this big claim, I'm just going to read right from the book recap here. Carrie shares how 50 years of radical feminism have solidified the primacy of the traditional male sphere of life and devalued the attributes, virtues, and strengths of women. Feminism, the ideology dedicated to smashing the patriarchy, has instead made male lives the norm for everyone. After 50 years of radical feminism, we can't even define woman. In this powerful new book, Carrie Gress says what cannot be said. Feminism has abolished women. Well, I'd say that sums it up pretty nicely. So with that, let's dive into the interview. But yes, it's so great to finally talk with you. I know we connected last fall and you were in the thick of writing what I believe is this book.
Yeah.
Right?
What I was doing. It was
always under a deadline. How many books? Yeah. Is this number 10 or number 11?
10. Yeah.
This is number 10.
Yep, exactly. So
wow. Well, it's the end of woman.
And yes, finally coming out. So yeah, they're really exciting.
Carrie, for people who don't know you, give us a little bit of your background and why, or I guess how you've come to this point of writing books and articles and being interviewed on topics of the modern feminist movement and especially a lot of the downfalls and the consequences that we're suffering because of it. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah. Well, I have 5 children. I have a PhD in philosophy. And when I was a philosophy student, I said I would never work on women's issues. It was just something I had no interest in. And I think part of the reason I didn't have any interest in it was because it felt like just way too academic. You know, it was the arguments I was reading that were being written within Catholic circles just felt inaccessible. And I wanted something that I could give to my friends, I could give to my family and help them navigate a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today. And I just wasn't finding things that I wanted to share. And so I think that was probably a lot of my, my negative reaction and knee-jerk reaction to it. And then I became a mom. And, one of the first books that I wrote, was called Ultimate Makeover, The Transforming Power of Motherhood, I think is the subtitle of it. And, I just really realized that motherhood is this amazing thing where you grow in virtues in ways that you probably could never do on your own unless you had the demands of children in your life. And, I'll tell the story about how I always had this sense of like things are going to be easier next week. It's going to get easier. It's going to get easier. And of course, it didn't get easier. You get to an age where it does get easier, but whether it was colds or potty training or you name it, there was just felt like there was always something. And I realized like, wow, this is actually like not a flaw. This is a feature of motherhood, is this way that I'm being formed and my virtues are growing and I'm becoming more patient and more compassionate and all of those things. So anyway, that was really what started it. And then of course I started digging into the Virgin Mary. I wrote the book, The Marian Option. And so this has just kind of flowed out of it because I started realizing like, looking around at the culture and just seeing how bad things are, that there's just not a ounce of really Christian morality left for women. And I wanted to know why. And then I wrote the Anti-Mary Exposed. And, I had so many people say, we love this book. Can you please write something for Protestants or for a secular audience? And so this was really supposed to be that kind of book. But I had never looked back at early feminists. I had at the Anti-Mary Exposed, I only looked back to the 1960s. And so when I started looking back at earlier feminism, that's when I really dug into this book. So that's kind of been the journey. And, I've just been amazed at the books that I've written haven't been written before, that you can't find this kind of argument in other places. And I know a lot of it is because people have jobs and they don't want to be fired. And I guess that's the beauty of not having a day job is, I can't really be fired from my wife as a stay-at-home mom, or my job as a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah, well, when you keep it ordered like that, but I will say it is still brave of you. It's not always comfortable. Maybe now you've been doing it for so long, but for many of us, what's happened, it was just yesterday. Mm-hmm. There's a situation where my parents have moved to a more conservative area, and my mom joined the local Facebook group, and she called me and she said, Emily, what's going on? I thought this was supposed to be a more conservative area. I see the school board meeting last week. They voted to keep a book with sexually explicit material. They couldn't even read the material at the school board meeting. It was so sexually explicit. Yet it was like 6-1 or something. They're keeping the book. And I looked at the Facebook comments and that was the most disheartening, is seeing the attacks on the mother that came forward about the book. And I wanted to say something about it. And I still had to pause, be like, wait, Emily, even though I've seen the images with my own eyes, I've read parts of the book, I still had to think, wait, am I crazy right now? Because we're living in a time when not only are not many people, I mean, it's happening more, which is a good thing, but not many moms are speaking out against this. Far more are staying silent, who I know don't want books like this in school libraries. But it still made me stop and pause and have to find a little bit of the courage to just make a post about it, to say, I think our standard at a minimum should be, if you cannot read the material at the school board meeting, it should not be in the school library. That is not a controversial statement. It should not be. So I am really grateful, though, for women and authors like you who are kind of paving this path, writing these books, really opening these conversations and topics, because it's so needed. It doesn't seem like it should be hard. And I thought that last night. I thought the reason I can make this post is because I don't have a job to be fired from. But yeah, there are clients I can lose. There are friends I could lose. It's still a little bit of a fear. But if you keep your life ordered, you're right. The most important roles in our life as a daughter of Christ and as a mother and wife, like, we can't lose those for just speaking truth. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
But
no, and that's true. And I know with this book, actually, we've had to, the ante has been raised a little bit, because now we have to worry about doxing. And, I think before, my books have been under the radar enough. And the Anti-Marriage Exposed was canceled, but I didn't have to worry about my children and people showing up at my home and those kinds of things. And so that's going to be the interesting thing to see what happens with this book, as far as just feeling secure and, will I need security going to speaking events and those kinds of things that you see other people doing, similar things, that's really become the nature of it. So it'll be interesting to see how it's all received. It may get no attention whatsoever, but that tends to be how the liberal media deals with things. They either ignore it or they ridicule it. So I'm kind of braced for both at this point.
Yeah. I would almost prefer the ridicule, because then at least it's getting out there more, right? I really hate when they ignore a great topic or book. Okay, let's talk about the book a little bit. So is this a secular book for this topic mostly? It looks like. I was reading a little bit of the...
It's a secular book. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. It's absolutely a secular book. And I really just dig into really the philosophical underpinnings of the feminist movement, all the way back to Mary Wollstonecraft, and sort of extract from it, what are the patterns here that we're seeing throughout feminism? What is it that we could actually call the feminist movement, based on these patterns that we see rippling through the movement for, 200 years. And so it was very easy to do that. And, a secular light, very much from just basic philosophy. And, I was astounded. I hadn't dug into any of this kind of content before, and I was just amazed at how awful it really is. I think I had this impression. A lot of people have said, the movement was hijacked in the 60s. And so I was expecting to find, some lovely work about women, and it's just not what's there. I mean, I think some things were amped up a lot in the 60s, and things changed in the 60s. But I don't think that the basic movement changed all that much. I think, and that's what the book demonstrates, is it starts with these three pillars, which are the occult, free love, and this idea of restructuring society, which is, of course, become the smashing the patriarchy. Those are there from almost the very beginning, and we just see them sort of grinding on throughout the centuries, and now, of course, in full bloom. So much so that, and the basic question they were asking was, how do we make women like men? Not how do we help women as women, but how do we make women more like men?
Right.
And that's really what we're seeing the fruition of today, with the elimination of the female body, and the incapacity of most of us to be able to describe or define what a woman is. That's really been there from the start. So this is the real fulfillment thereof. So that was an amazing thing to see this whole thread, from start to finish. And this is where we're at the end of the movement, the pinnacle of it in their minds.
Yeah, I hope near the end of the book you have the solution for it all, because I do see section 4. You have 4 sections. The first is the lost girls, then the mean girls, then no girls, which we're in the no girl zone right now. And then the 4th section, though, I feel hopeful because it says the way home. I'm just going to assume you have all the solutions there, and we are going to see those play out over the next decade or century. It's going to take a while to reverse all this. But let's first get to the core of the issue. I do think there are listeners of this show who don't necessarily agree with my values or my viewpoint. It's really interesting. So I kind of did a switch on my whole show about a year ago. It was really a show for business women, entrepreneurs. It was more of a bit of a like hustle show. And now it's become the anti that, I would say, as I have grown in what I've just realized about life, about the feminist movement, about why I wasn't happy, even though I grew the type of business I was supposed to be growing and had the extra help and support at home, doing the job that really I was supposed to be doing, which was like raising my children and being there for my family. So I was doing all those things and realized I was really unhappy. So with that, the amazing thing is I think I still have people listening who don't necessarily subscribe to the same viewpoints as me, which I think is great. So let's start there and let's get to the heart of the issue. If we've had all these advances in the feminist movement, I mean, surely people can look back and say, we have come a long way. The feminist movement has really grown. Then why aren't women happier? You have a statistic you shared in an article you wrote actually a few years back. I think it was a couple of years back. So I don't know how old the statistic is, but at the time it was 50% of white liberal women under the age of 30 have some type of mental health issue. 50%. And that's an astounding figure considering how happy we should be.
Yeah, I think that's has been one of my motivating factors, has been to see like, well, what's happened with women? Are we actually happier because of all these advances and everything that's happened? And I'm fascinated by the fact that we aren't. The depression rate among women is just through the roof. You've got STDs, you've got suicide rates, divorce. All of these things are really pointing to women who aren't happy, and that's what the data continually is showing, is that we're less happy now than we were apparently back in the 70s and prior to when we were supposed to be so miserable. And I think one of the main objections that I hear most of the time is, you should be grateful for feminism because you have the right to vote, you get an advanced degree, you work, all of those kinds of things. And I'm always fascinated by this question because it makes me realize how much we have come to believe that it was only feminism that brought these things to us, instead of it just being basic justice or natural law. And the problem is not recognizing like how much damage has come because of the way that feminism promoted these things. There's a way to say like women need to be educated, women need to vote, all of that, without saying you have to have free love, you have to involve the cult, and you have to want to completely restructure society. I think the other thing we also sort of gets shoved under the carpet really is just the abortion numbers too. If you look at the number of lives that have been taken through abortion, it absolutely dwarfs any of the tyrants of the 20th century. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, all of them. The numbers are absolutely astounding. I think the Guttmacher Institute is speculating that there were 73 million abortions in the world in just last year. There's 69 million people that live in England. So imagine in the United Kingdom. Imagine the whole United Kingdom being wiped out. That's the number of abortions that we're having in the world. Now, that's not to say that abortions weren't happening beforehand, before abortion was legalized, but 73 million babies. And that's got all kinds of effects. I mean, this is where the depression statistics are coming from. We know that an abortion doesn't leave people unscarred, either biologically or emotionally or otherwise, spiritually, certainly. So I think that those are the things that we have to start paying attention to and just asking, why did all these other bad things have to come? And is it really worth the price that we've paid for these things that we're enjoying now? And why do we have to feel grateful that all these bad things came into the culture as well. So it's those kinds of questions that I think we really need to start looking at and asking.
Yeah, I love reading your books because I learned so much as someone who wasn't raised with these beliefs, or to even to take a step back and to look at the situation. I think that's why I'm so passionate about it now, because I think had I been in a situation with an unplanned pregnancy, in a not ideal circumstance, I think everyone around me would have been completely acceptable and probably encouraged, I'm guessing, to use abortion as a solution to that. And it's wild to me because I was raised in a very loving environment, very wonderful people. And I don't, they're not to blame for this mentality, but it wasn't until just the last 10 years that I opened my eyes to the idea that, wait, this isn't normal. It is not. Is this healthy when a society makes a woman think her power is in killing the child that can grow her own inside? Like, why is that where we're receiving our power? And it's kind of crazy because there are so many people like me that were raised in very nurturing, loving households. And this was just kind of ingrained in us just from the culture. We kind of absorb the culture that's around us, which I think is why I'm so passionate about where the media is going, where big corporations are going, all the propaganda we don't realize we're being fed these lies from a really young age. I mean, now it's really compounded even with children's shows. But if you look at like Handmaid's Tale, it's just inner popular culture. It's seeping in these thoughts. Then you look at all these companies that are using men as their spokespeople, and their companies that are supposed to represent women. So our iconic brands that are doing that. Even our own president affirming a trans man or a self-affirming trans man. I don't know if it's trans man or trans woman. I can't keep all of this straight, but basically a man who's living as a woman. If you just see all of that and you don't have an influence in your life who will say, this isn't right, this isn't the truth, this is wrong, you will just absorb that and assume it's right because you're seeing it everywhere. And so my question is how do we get people like me maybe a decade ago, who didn't have these influences in their life that would say, well, that's not actually right, because we all kind of live in our own bubbles. And mostly I think we absorb the content and the ideas and from people similar to us. How do we even consider breaking out of that? And like, what questions should we be asking ourselves? Because I'm the first to admit, like, I don't follow a lot of liberal media and thought leaders because they would really annoy me. They would drive me crazy, quite frankly. So I assume people who think differently than me are the same way. They might not want to pick up your book because they just already know they don't agree with it. It wouldn't be a very pleasant book for them to read. But where can we start in asking questions or creating conversations that just plant those seeds?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, this has been a problem for a long time. This is why feminism has been so successful, because it has figured out very, very early on how to brainwash us. Even if you just think about the way that they not only have defined their position, but they've defined what they want people to believe is the pro-life position. This is why the Handmaid's Tale is brought out. This is why every time there's some controversy, you've got those women in their red bonnets and cloaks, because they want the world to think, oh, well, this is what we're opposed. They've created this binary of here's one side and here's the other side. But the other side that they've created isn't actually us. That's their like fabricated us, because it's a straw man. It looks very easy to defeat that and to debunk it. So this is, I think that question is just really the hardest question. And this is one of the things that I've talked about for years now, is we haven't provided like an off-ramp to the popular culture for other women to start even asking the question, maybe all this stuff I've believed for so long isn't actually making me happy. And I think one of the areas where I'm seeing a lot of people being open to this are the women who have gone through feminism. They're now 50, 60, 70 years old. And they're like, I did everything that I was supposed to do, that the feminist movement told me to do. And I'm miserable. I don't have parents. I don't have a husband. I don't have children. I've got a great bank account, but what else do I have in my life? And, it's at that point where they can't go back and change. They can't start having children now. They're probably not going to get married. So I think it's one of those things that, we need to start asking questions. We need to start looking more deeply. We need to start saying, even the trans thing is just an amazing piece to me because of how quickly it seemed to come on. And everybody's sort of like, of course this is natural. Whereas, 10 years ago, everybody would have been like, what are you talking about? Just to see how quickly things are being absorbed and even just the moving of the yardstick. If we think about what the conversations that we were having around the time same-sex marriage was, approved in the Supreme Court, these are very different conversations that we're having now. And just to see how far things are and quickly things are progressing, I think that those are the kinds of things that need to give us pause. And also just even the damage that we're doing. I mean, that's amazing part about the trans issue, especially with children, is this is irreparable damage. This isn't something that they can just be like, well, we're going to unpause the puberty blockers. Like, that's the biggest lie there is. There's so much damage that's happening to the body because of that can't be undone. You can't put new functioning breasts back on a girl when she decides, I don't want to do this anymore, and now I want to have children. So I think this is the saddest and the hardest part, is just to see how quickly it's accelerating and how incredible the damage is. So I'm hoping that, those are the kinds of things that are beginning to raise the questions, and people are beginning to say, what is going on here? And start really paying attention. I think we're seeing a lot of that the giant has been poked one too many times, whether it's Target or Bud Light, and people are just tired of how extreme things have gotten so quickly.
Yeah. And maybe that's for the best that it has gotten that extreme this year, because I think it is waking some people up to it. Because like you said, it's really damaging when all of these moms get on board with it. And think about, we just had a bookshelf painted in our basement, and I came home and the house had been, all shut up, and it was very strong fumes. And I opened all the windows and the door, and I had a fan going. And last night I looked at my husband. I'm like, do you think the fumes are still too strong? Like, do you think we've done damage of having our kids breathe this in today? we worry about such little things, or what our kids are eating. Is it organic? Are there pesticides? Well, imagine by simply affirming and supporting that this is at all sane idea to give children puberty blockers. Like, imagine the irreversible damage to these poor children, because we are contributing to a culture where that's just okay. And I want to point out, so I don't know if I told you about this in any of my emails. Did you hear about American Girl doll, like the doll company? What happened? So last year they put on this book. They put on a book on body image. Iconic brand, right? American Girl is the name of the brand, right? And they have, apparently, I didn't know they got into this. Smart Girls Guide. They apparently became a thought leader in how young girls should address puberty. Like, I guess they don't just stick to dolls. I didn't know that. But they put out a series of these books. Right. This book has a whole section. Well, this is one on gender joy, and it's about how you could be born a girl and actually be a boy. And it, affirms that. Here's a picture of the little kid at the doctor's office. If you're not sure, it says here, if you haven't gone through puberty yet, the doctor might offer medicine to delay your body's changes, giving you more time to think about your gender identity. And if you've already gone through puberty, a doctor can still help. It eventually goes on to say, if you don't have a parent you can trust, there are other resources and places you can go to have this conversation. Not only that, there are multiple storylines. There's a girl in here who is deaf, Jewish, and trans. And let's talk about why she might be those things, but she's so much more than that. And just weaving in, there's probably about 4 storylines where they just weave in the kid is also trans. Right. This is American Girl doll. And we have our biggest companies targeting children doing this. So the Target, the Kohl's, the clothing line, Target. Yeah, I actually know someone who works for corporate Target who told me, well, we didn't actually sell these for children. The multi-gender tuck swimsuits. And I said, oh no, it's in my app. I went to my app, screenshot it, showed for starting at 4 years old. So even people who work at these companies don't always know this. Well, that's why, by the way, I'm creating my own doll line. I'm making my own doll. This is
That's
like a
amazing.
prototype.
That's
Yeah,
great.
it launches in about a month. It's called Faith Friends. It's going to be the Christian alternative to American Girl that actually celebrates girls, the girls
Awesome.
that God
Good for
made them to
you.
be. So that's fun. I will have to I might need help
Yeah.
on writing future books because apparently you got to really get into the books with these. But
That
I
makes
do
sense.
feel like that's part of it,
Yeah.
right? Is we need,
Congratulations. Great.
thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks. Yeah, I feel like we just need, this is going to be like my little contribution. But I think as more
Mhm.
companies are denying the truth of who women are and who girls are,
Yeah.
we are going to almost need people to step up
Yeah.
and fill in these gaps and offer an alternative, because it's not acceptable to, it's like we're having to tiptoe around kids'
Yeah.
shows and kids' books. I had to have conversations
Yeah.
with my 7 and 8-year-olds that I shouldn't have had to have at this point, but it was forced upon me by the culture. So I guess now, what's your advice for moms that are seeing all this and we're not happy with it? How do we, how can we be a part of this way home?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I congratulations. I love your idea of doing the dolls. I'm so heartened by that, because I think the other thing that's so amazing to me is just all these stories that we don't hear because we're so busy hearing about the trans athletes and where everything's sort of filtered through Gloria Steinem and all of these, Meghan Markle, like these are being upheld as the kind of women that we should want to be. And yet there's so many amazing, beautiful, rich stories of women that are just not being told. And so anyway, it's incredibly heartening to see that you will be telling some of these stories in a way that we don't have to tiptoe around or feel like we, like, oh, I'm spending my money there, really, and I think that's part of it, is just creating that. And this is one of the reasons why I've created my own brand, Theology of Home. We sell candles and lifestyle products, because I saw all of the issues that we were facing were coming because they were populated in magazines, they're in fashion, they're in Hollywood, they're in music, they're in lifestyle brands, all of this. Look at Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop. And we're not putting things out there with our own messaging in them. We're not paying attention to how important culture is. We're not paying attention to how important something in your hands that you can hold on to and you can give as a gift. These are all really important things, especially to women, and we are not paying attention to them. So, I can make arguments all day long in my books, but if I can actually, through our books, Theology of Home, I can tell a story through beautiful visuals that people want to actually look through. And, they just sit down and start thumbing through a book like that. That's going to go a lot further than, my best crafted intellectual arguments, I think, for most people, because we're not really dealing with the age of reason anymore. We're very much emotions and visuals. And I think those are really important things to do. The other thing that, is obviously really important is creating strong families and, living out our vocation as women, sort of figuring out what that even means, and trying to wash out in our own lives, these different ways in which we have really bought into what the movement is trying to do to us, and in terms of, whether it's the deep narcissism that we have, the sense that our children's lives are secondary to our lives, that our husbands are unimportant, they're just sort of supposed to be support role, but not really important. And, all of these different ways that we need to sort of start thinking about our lives as women again, and what it means to be a woman. And, in the last chapter of my book, I actually talk a lot about, like, how do we even define womanhood? And, the big piece that's always missing is just even this notion of motherhood. And I don't mean just biological motherhood. We see even in religious sisters, I think there's such a great example of psychological and spiritual motherhood. And this is what they've done for centuries, whether it was orphanages or hospitals or education. They're providing a place for children to really grow into who they are. And I think we need to start looking at those areas, but also passing that down to our daughters, helping our sons understand that, helping them understand they're not just, these secondary toxic masculinity,
Right.
capsules waiting to be launched into the culture to destroy it. All of these kinds of things need tweaking. And the great thing is that when we start digging into it, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of just goodness that comes from it, instead of, like, I feel like so much of the culture right now feels grinding and painful and bitter and vicious. And, that's the real surprised is to see what happens when you're working within human nature the way that God intended it, then good things happen instead of, the kind of pressure and tyranny that we're all facing at the moment.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about the off ramps, where we find those off ramps. I think for a lot of us, it certainly was for me. The year of 2020 was a forced off ramp that was such a gift. It kind of forced me to have to stop or slow down my business, and then it's like the light was there. I was like, wait, this is actually easier. Life can be easier if I step into my role truly as a mother and a wife, and I don't try to strive to be an equal earner or success. And there are just certain things that are planted. These feminist ideas are planted as little seeds in our mind from a young age that can become really toxic and make us very unhappy. And like you said, when you're describing these women who are now seeing the fruits or the lack of those fruits now later in life, and it's too late to change it, that makes me so sad. And I'm so grateful that I discovered that when I did, because it absolutely changed our lives forever. I mean, we had 2 more children, and it felt so much easier and happier. I mean, I love all my children, but I've been a much better mother for the second 2 and a much more present, happy woman than I was in the beginning when I was trying to do it all. And I really do hope we can find other off ramps that aren't as forced in that way. And I do think these types of conversations, books like you're writing and articles are key to that. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. Even just sharing with the women around in your life too, having conversations about this and not shying away from it from your immediate group of friends, I think is really important. It's obviously can be uncomfortable, but I think the great thing is that what we're presenting is really the desire of the human heart. We just don't know it. We sort of have to just dust off women's hearts, like your experience, and help women actually see, like, no, wait, this is actually really what you've been looking for, is this idea of seasons of life, of certain things you have to happen at this time of your life. And then, everything sort of becomes ordered when you see it that way, instead of trying to do everything all at once and feeling like a failure that you can't possibly do all of these things well simultaneously. So I think that's the beautiful thing is, whether it's book groups or just friendships or family, these are the ways in which I've seen the women who really understand this have found an off ramp through friendships and people that are in their lives. I mean, my off ramp came because I grew up in Oregon, and I went to the University of Oregon, and I saw a lot of these things that are happening now were happening there much, much earlier. And I didn't have a response to them. And I knew that this was misery making, and that the things that were being suggested were not great. I had a grandmother who was very involved in the occult. The hookup culture was just beginning, and I just saw none of this is really working. Like, there's got to be a different way. And, thankfully I was raised as a Catholic, very lukewarm Catholic, but that was really where I started looking and thinking, there's got to be an answer here. And that has led me obviously to doing so much more than I ever imagined, and, talking about this issue in ways that I never dreamed of. But that I think it's exciting when you start hitting on something and realizing I'm not the only one that hates this and who wants something different. Right. And, wants my children's lives and my family's life, all of that to look different than it is. So, those personal relationships I think are incredibly important for sharing this, and just even asking questions, I think, to people is the easiest way to approach it, instead of feeling like you have to tell people things. Kind of asking simple questions to let people start talking and share their own experience can go a long way too. And, take the pressure off of feeling like we have to evangelize or something on this issue. Yeah.
You mentioned the theology of home books. I think you have 3 of them now, right? There are 3 different parts of it. And I have
there's a 4th one coming out this fall. Yeah.
Oh, great. Just keep on going. Keep on bringing those books out, Carrie. You're so good. You're so good at this. I do have...
I didn't write the last one.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to say is they are beautiful coffee table books. And I think you're right that for some people at the beginning, it's a great I would recommend that for someone to get one of your Theology of Home books, put it on the coffee table, just flip through it sometimes, just go to the section or the page that grabs you and looks beautiful and intrigues you, and just start reading a little bit here and there. You just start to think about some of these concepts a little bit, let them impact you in your heart a little bit, think on them, and then definitely dive into one of your books. Now, real quick, can you give us a rundown? I know I said The Lost Girls, The Mean Girls, No Girls, The Way Home. Just tell me a little bit about the format of the book and what we're going to actually learn when we read your The End of Woman.
So the first part is basically just looking at all these women who have helped determine really feminist policies in the culture. All of them, to a one, had just incredibly broken lives, and you can see that kind of coming out of who they are and affecting the whole movement. The second part, the Mean Girls, is really just what happens when you put some really disordered women in power. And, we can see this in our own culture. Like, think about all the women who are influential in the culture. Most of them are over 70, which is fascinating. Women like Pelosi and Hillary Clinton and, there's all the political people, but then there's also a lot, look at The View. These are not young women that have started The View and are carrying it along at this point. And there becomes this kind of queen bee syndrome, which I think all of us as women have experienced, and even as little girls, we experience. Like, there's the queen bee in the culture, and she's right, and everybody's got to follow her. And this is what we've seen in the culture, so much to the detriment of men and to boys, of course, too. And then, of course, we've got No Girls. We went from the power struggle that was part of the Mean Girls that's really turned into No Girls. And you've got a lot of these Mean Girls who are promoting this as well. This idea that, little girls are going to be better off if they have top surgeries and are taking testosterone. They're not going to commit suicide. That's the big lie that this is where they're headed. If you don't let them get testosterone, they're going to kill themselves. And the statistics show that the suicides actually happen after, a few years after these top surgeries and these transitions start taking place. So that's really where the despair sets in. And then, of course, the big question is, well, how do we get back? How do we battle this? How do we deal with this? And certainly there's always that question of God, because what's happened is this is really, as Whittaker Chambers, who wrote that amazing book called Witness, said, this is the world's second oldest religion. This is the idea of worshiping self. And that's what we've seen with the feminist movement. This is what we're seeing right now. And it's just turning away from God entirely. And that's really, one of the chapters. And then, of course, just how do we look at women? How do we start understanding what it means to be a woman? How do we start flushing this toxicity out of our systems and the way that we think about things, and start getting back to something that's really life-giving and beautiful, fun, and that people want to be around and engage in, instead of are repulsed by. So that's kind of the basic run of the whole book.
And when can we get it for pre-sale?
So it's already available for pre-sale at Amazon and all of the places where books are sold. If people want a signed copy, they can pre-order one from my site, theologyofhome.com. But it comes out August 15th. So that's when things will start shipping. And anyway, it'll be really interesting to see how it comes off. It's already been very well received and getting a lot of buzz and attention. So there's another book that just came out. Peachy Keenan just came out with a book called Domestic Extremist, which is another amazing book. And I feel like in a lot of ways is very complementary to what I've done, different, but more very complementary in terms of helping us just figure out, why this is important on a cultural level, and how do we protect our children and our families.
Yeah. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. And I'll be linking to where people can get your book, those autographed copies. And while they're at Theology of Home, they can probably shop around too. I'm noticing just some things over your shoulder. I don't know if those are like tea towels and some candles or something, but
tea towels.
Yeah.
And books, and we've all kinds of great lifestyle products. So yes, come shop with us. Nothing from China. We're really diligent about trying to make sure we work with artisans.
Thanks so much for hanging out and listening to today's episode. If you were inspired by what you heard, I'd love if you shared it on social, give it a 5-star review on iTunes, and spread the word. But more than being inspired, I hope you're motivated to take action. Remember to just start. Take those steps today to get to where you want to be. And if you're ready to take your business to the next level, head on over to gethappypr.com and check out my agency and what we can do for you, or connect with me over on Instagram at Emily Richett. That's Emily, Richett. See you next time.